support that is needed for our preschool teams. Finally, we'll look at some kindergarten readiness data. So this is showing the percent of students at or above benchmark, and it is very important comparison data because it is comparing our students in Council Bluffs Community School District to those enrolled in preschool programs getting statewide voluntary preschool program funding throughout the state. This is only 4-year-old data, so it is showing 4-year-olds who are demonstrating kindergarten readiness skills. And you will see the teal and purple bars there are the state data, and it's fall to winter respectively, whereas the darker blue and the gold are our Council Bluffs Community School District 4-year-old preschool data, again, fall to winter. What I hope you notice here is that when you look at that fall data after those first 12 weeks, you will see that our dark blue bar is consistently lower than that teal bar. So even after 12 weeks of instruction, our preschool students just aren't quite up to the state average for kindergarten readiness in November. But what I hope you also notice is that our gold bar is growing at a more rapid pace than that purple bar in the state. So we are really closing the gap for our preschool students. And in some cases, we are right equal, a little bit above, and some we're still a little bit below, but the gap is narrowing. And this next slide will show the amount of growth that we had compared to the state in all areas as well. So the purple bars on this graph represent the state's percentage of growth in each area from fall to winter, and then those blue data points above represent our growth from fall to winter. So for example, when you look at social emotional across the state, 32% more students were showing those kindergarten readiness skills in the winter than in the fall. But in our district, 37% more students were. We were really impressed with some of the areas like cognitive and language. There are just really, really big jumps in our growth there. So we know that we are making a difference for our students and we are getting them caught up. We are also serving at-risk students, and that is not the model in every preschool program across the state. Some serve everybody. It just really varies. So we're very fortunate that we're able to serve the students who need it most and that we're able to extend a lot of their days to full day. So we also wanted to take a look at what this means down the road. What does this mean for our kindergarten students? So we just took a look at the current kindergarten class, the class of 2033, because we had very similar data last year at this same time. We didn't get the benefit of seeing how they would have finished the year in spring, but we did get to see how they started the year in the fall. So what we did was we looked at both the reading or literacy area and the math area. The blue bars there are showing how they did on that kindergarten readiness in the winter of their preschool year. So, the gold bar is showing the percentage of students that were meeting those widely held expectations in the winter of their preschool year. And then finally, that orange bar is showing how students did in kindergarten on that incoming assessment, that baseline MAP assessment for reading and math. So we're seeing that students are really retaining those skills that they gained in their preschool experience. And even more so, I apologize, these dots didn't make it into your board packets for the printing, but those purple dots on the top above the bars show the students who were in our preschool programs. So we actually had, let me find my numbers, I apologize. In reading, 83% of current kindergarten students who went through our preschool programs were either average or above on the MAP assessment versus 77% of their classmates who did not participate in our preschools, and that's what that teal dot is showing. And then similarly in math, we had 78% of students who had attended Council Bluffs Community School District preschool that were average or above on the MAP, and then compared to 68% of their peers who did not attend our preschool. And Dr. Shudak worked his magic, and he told me that those math numbers are significantly, statistically significant. He said the reading is close. It was not significant at the 0.05 level, but really close at the 0.07. So really still very strong data that we're proud of, and we're proud that they're retaining that information heading into kindergarten. So in summary, I am just incredibly proud of the hard work of our preschool team. This year more than ever, they've faced challenges of this unique year, and they have truly approached each hurdle with just the most positive attitudes and problem-solving mindsets. I'm also very proud of the resiliency of our students and thankful for the support of our families who hung in there with us those first 3 or 4 weeks of hybrid learning and those rare remote days. We've had some really positive unintended consequences of family engagement through all of this and are bringing our families into our classrooms via technology now too. What questions do you have for me? Thank you. Thank you. The team is awesome.
As one of our jobs as board members, we are to be advocates for our students. And one thing that Dr. Matthews has shown us is that even though our programs are targeted enrollment, we are closing the gap. And many years ago, even the Federal Reserve of Minnesota recognized the importance of early childhood learning. And they found that every dollar that was spent on preschool yielded anywhere from $5 to over $15 in benefits. So as board members, and I know we're pretty much through this legislative session, but we need to promote funding for our preschool programs. Considering a preschool student as just 50% of a student is unacceptable. All students should if they are in an approved preschool program approved by the state, they should be counted as one student, not half a student. So I salute your efforts and your teams and your teachers and your parents for believing in our program, because we truly are closing that gap and making sure that all of our students are achieving at high levels. So thank you for your leadership.
Thank you for your advocacy.
Thank you for everything that you've done this year. I know quite a few parents of preschool kids, and we have great teachers all across our district, but you should know that the comments that I hear from those parents are nothing but outstanding. They really love their preschool teachers, so you're doing a really good job with the program. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Matthews.
you.
At this time, I'm going to ask, we're going to do our informational presentation. I'm going to ask Mr. Schultz and Ms. Smith to join us at the podium, and they're going to highlight for you some of the work around principal development. I think Mr. Schultz is trying to cast. Oh, there it is.
Well, good evening, and thank you for having us tonight. We really appreciate that. Mark and I are going to talk a little bit tonight about the work we do with principals, and also let you know some recent findings that have been published by the Wallace Foundation about why the role of the principal is so critical in our schools and how it really shows that the work we do is supporting that. So we're excited to be able to talk with you about this tonight. So when we switched over into the roles that we are currently in 2018, right after the spring, in 2018, one of the things that we noticed as we were looking about what we were going to do and how we were going to best serve principals is that we had some data that showed from our Panorama teacher survey that only 41% of teachers were satisfied with the feedback they got. And we know how important feedback is to improving the quality of teaching. And so we made that our district focus. That was one of the things that we said, this is what we need to do with our principal group. So one of the things that Mark and I do monthly with principals is we have professional development in a large group setting or virtually this year, as we've had it many times, focused around a topic or topics that kind of intertwine together. So over the next couple of years, the things that we focused on were really around, our professional development was really around two things: effective instruction, and we paired that with the changes that were made in the teacher evaluation system based on the Danielson framework. And so we really worked with the help of Moses Chalupnik, our professional development coordinator, or director, to provide quality professional development around using that to help improve teacher instruction in the classroom. Side by side with that, we also worked on provided professional development on how do you provide quality feedback to people. What does that look like? How does that sound? How do you know it's making a difference in what you're working on? And so through our work with that, with professional development, that's kind of like the workshop model. You go to a workshop, you learn some things, right? Then we pair that with our one-on-one coaching, so the workplace model. So what we do in professional development, there's always an expectation that you're taking that into your school, you're learning from that, you're going to implement that as a leader. This is all around leadership development. How are we helping those principals become better leaders in their building? So when we go into coaching, I put up here one-on-one reflective coaching, and that is our goal that we're asking them to reflect and do. But in reality, we have coaching stances that go from reflected all the way up to candid conversations when we're doing things with principals. It could be collaborating, it could be, we could be calibrating about what we're seeing in the classrooms. So Mark and I go out into classrooms with teachers, and so when we were looking at the Danielson work, we would go out, we would look and say, all right, what are you thinking about what you saw? How does this fit with what it is? And have those great conversations and develop that. And then next, how are you going to talk with that teacher? What's your kind of conversation look like? Sometimes our coaching is also around observing them and giving them feedback with what we see. So we'll observe them having a conversation with the teacher and then give them feedback on the skills we're seeing them develop in those areas. And so those things happen on a weekly basis. It's not the same every single week, but every week we are out with our principals, every single principal, working and coaching with them based on some of the feedback or some of the professional development that they're getting on that monthly basis. What we've noticed then in 2021 on our teacher survey of Pam Moran about feedback, it had gone up 18 percentage points about how teachers are feeling the feedback, the quality of feedback, the amount of feedback, the frequency of feedback. All those questions around that, the perception of teachers went up 28 or 18 percentage points with that. It's not our all-time high. This was just our last one. It kind of took a little dip during the COVID during the fall, as you can kind of imagine with doing that. But overall, we're seeing that push. We are seeing what we are working with that. It's making a difference with what teachers are thinking about it. The other thing that you see down there is Time Tracker. Time Tracker is part of the SAM's initiative. Most of our principals, not all of our vice principals, but our principals track their time with their SAM on how much time they're spending on instruction, what kind of instruction, looking at versus how much time they're spending on management. And so we just this was just one example of a principal that back in 2018, 57%, which is really a good, you think, wow, that's really a good percent. But now is spending 77% of their time on that. And we had similar ranges in our principals all over, but it was kind of hard to, honestly, kind of hard to average. So we just gave you one example. But I know, like, for example, in my secondaries, all my principals are in the high 60s, low 70s of the amount of instructional time they're spending in their classroom. And again, that switch from before when they were going in and observing and giving feedback to now is a big part of that. And that was up, like we said there, 20 percentage points. Another thing that Mark and I do is we coach around school improvement. And I know this is not unfamiliar to you because you've been in here talking with our principals every year about school improvement and the process that they go through when they're doing that. And what we really coach around here, let me start with the data point going back to 2018, our very first MAP data that came in. In math, as a district, 50.77 kids fell in that range that they were average, above average, or high average. And in reading, it was 56.01% of our kids that did this. So as we are going and coaching on school improvement, we are really looking at how do we work with them on planning for what they're going to do. A lot of our coaching is around that, and then the monitoring. We also are teaching them, like, what's a good implementation study look like? How do you know what you're working on with your staff is getting into the classroom and affecting kids? And so, and then what's that impact? What are you seeing? What did you choose to monitor what you wanted to see growth in? And are you seeing that? And if you're not, what are you doing and going through that? And so we also coach around that part of that. Another thing that we do with them around school improvement is we have professional learning communities with them, the PLCs with them. It looks different some years. In the past, when we were able to get into schools and be around, we did what we called cluster visits, where we would take cross sections of principals to go into another building and observe with that principal and then talk about what they're seeing, and that principal can learn from their colleagues in that with doing that. We've gone in with a focus that would say, okay, let's specifically look at what student voice is like, and let's go out and find good examples of that, and what are you seeing, what did that teacher do? So it's a learning process that they're doing with colleagues. This year we've had to kind of change that to a professional study because we've been doing it virtually, but this year it's really all around how are they engaging kids in challenging tasks? How are kids being engaged in challenging tasks in their buildings? And they share things like what implementation studies they're going on and do. What are they finding? So what did you find? How did you make that change? And so again, they're learning from each other. And that's an important thing that Mark and I facilitate and set up so that they're able to do that. So again, as a result, in our last MAP test, our math was up 5.4 percentage points, and reading was up 6.5 percentage points. So I think, we look at those are markers that we look to say is what we're doing making a difference with our principals, and in turn that they are making a difference with what's happening in their schools. So we talked about looking through the lens. You had just talked about this earlier, and what lens did you look for? And a big part of this year, we went through the eye of COVID as we were walking into the classroom. And, oh, bless your heart. I'm not saying that, not bless your little heart, just bless your heart, thank you. Get me going. So we were talking through, or we were looking when we would go into classrooms while we were doing these other things. And one of the things we said is like, what's your COVID eye telling you right now? What's it telling you around safety? What do you see? What do you see with masks? What do you see with where kids are positioned? And this was so critically important when we first came back. Because as you remember, everyone was a little bit nervous. We didn't know what was going to happen. And so this was one of the eyes that we looked through. But just in this COVID time, we also had to work and adjust and it's all about adjusting. A lot of our coaching goes around, what are you adjusting to now? And when you think of what our principals have had to adjust to, the return to learn plan and everything that went on there, hybrid learning and how did that look, virtual academy, all of this new as an administrator in their building, and that was our job to help coach them through that and be able to look at that. How technology went and is still going with many things. But now, as we mentioned earlier, our new look through that we're starting with is equity. And so now when we go into classrooms, it's more questions like, how do you know all kids had that opportunity to respond? What are you seeing with that? Great question from the teacher. How do you know how that responded? How were kids grouped? Are kids having that opportunity to do that? And so we're now really starting to shift our focus and shift that lens into it with an equity eye as we're going through with some of our other things. And so that kind of gives you the life of Mark and I. I mean, really, there are some other things, but that's kind of like the big picture life of Mark and I. But he's going to talk with you a little bit now about why that's so critical and why that's important. Take my water in my bath.
All right. Thank you, board, for the opportunity to talk about our work. We do it every day. We take it for granted, but it's a privilege to be able to serve our schools the way we do. I'd also like to, before I dig into the next slide on some research, is we are also grateful that we have consulted with 4 Points and our coach, Steve Gehring. I know earlier in the year we had approved his contract, and he works monthly with Julie and myself, gives us a lot of feedback too. So we kind of have a big series of feedback. Principals give teachers feedback, we give principals feedback, and Steve gives us feedback. And ultimately, teachers are giving students feedback, and we get student achievement. So it's like a big circle for us too. All right. So really exciting is Julie shared our work and gave you a big picture of the work that we do in developing principals directly, so they can become better at what they do for developing teachers, but also with school improvement planning. Well, the Wallace Foundation just released a couple weeks ago some new findings in 2021, and you can see the quote here from the president. And he said that the results of this study are striking, and that suggesting the link between leadership and learning is even stronger than we had previously known. We know principles matter. You know, you can look at so many schools, and any successful school, they all have successful principals. You'll rarely find a successful school with a poor achieving principal. So, and that's research all over the place. And we believe that. So we know developing principles is critical work. So as Julie described what we do, it was great when this research came out because it really reaffirmed our practice and what we do. The Wallace Foundation identified 4 key behaviors that principals do, that effective principals do. They do well. That first one is really focusing on instruction. You know, Julie talked about how we coach them to be better at giving teachers feedback. Observation, recognizing good instruction, having a conversation with the teacher to improve their instruction so it's even enhanced. Well, that's number 1. It says right there around instruction. So we've been doing that. We're like, yes. It's really nice to reaffirm that work. It's important too, not just the instruction, that principals know what the curriculum is, how the materials work, so they can really support teachers in implementing that. So love that we're aligned with that research. The second one is really around school climate. And I think in any organization this makes sense, that a positive climate, you're going to have people that want to do better work, that do better work. It's a great place to be, it's a great place to work, and some of our best employees are going to want to stay there. And so principals that can really foster a great climate are going to have some of the best people in that school. And so that's why it's number 2 on the list, that climate matters, right? The third one that the research came out is really on collaboration, and effective principals are able to take their school and really have a vision of collaboration where you don't come to school, go to your room, and shut your door. You come out of your rooms. And this year was like especially challenging because, we limited group meetings because of COVID. But the technology that we have is amazing with Google Meet. We're still having meetings. We're still collaborating, right? And so our effective principals really understand that that's important, that people do better when they collaborate with each other, when they lean on each other, when they learn from each other. It's not about being suffering in silence, and sometimes that can be very negative. And if you don't have that support system set up, teachers may not have as much success. And we know if a teacher's not having success, then students most likely aren't either. And so that's why it's so important that principals really collaborate or focus on collaboration. The second part of that is really those professional learning communities. Julie talked about how we facilitate those with principals. So they have a team that they're learning with. They study books together. They go to schools, they implement, and they talk about what they see. Well, same thing happens in our schools with PLCs. We call them PLCs, or learning teams. And they're usually grade level based or they're content based. And they're really focusing on student achievement data. They'll look at results of student work. They'll talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and they really learn together on how they can improve to improve student learning. Those are critical in schools, and as the research shows here, our effective principals do those things, and those are part of our work in coaching principals. That final one is really about how effective principals use resources, human resources and dollar resources in their school. They maximize time, they're very efficient, they don't have a lot of waste in their building, and the money that they have allocated, they focus it specifically on student learning. If it doesn't touch directly student learning, it's not prioritized, and that's what our effective principals do. And there's another thing too that I want to talk about too, and that's that hiring is key. That our effective principals hire well. They do the work, they take time, they really believe that hiring is important, is critical. And so those are the 4 effective principal behaviors that the research has highlighted. And as Julie shared earlier, we really are pleased that that aligns so much with our work. It really does. Final thing I want to share with you tonight is another quote from the Wallace Foundation. And they said it's difficult to envision an investment with a higher ceiling on its potential return than a successful effort to improve principal leadership. And just reflecting on that, we think about the teacher in the classroom. Teachers are the most important. We know that because they're closest to kids. A teacher has only so many students that she impacts each year on a roster. If it's elementary, it's about 22 students. Well, our average elementary principal has about 400 kids. So when you think about an effective principal, that scope of influence is much greater. So it's very important to have effective teachers and effective principals. And we believe that if we have that, we're going to have high student achievement in our school district. And with equity, every student's going to succeed. And with the second piece of paper. So what questions do you have for me or Julie about our work in developing principals or any of the research from the Wallace Foundation?
Questions from the board?
I had one, but you answered it. My question was, what was the average time that our principals, our lead teacher in the school spends teaching?
Yeah.
And, you gave us, one teacher roughly went from 57% to 77% of the time. So that's a tremendous increase in the amount of time our lead teacher is in the classroom teaching.
Yeah, and that's
Incredible.
attainable with our SAM process, that we have a SAM in the building that can handle some of those non-urgent and important matters to allow the principal to be freed up to be working in PLCs, working in the classroom with teachers, and doing instructional focused activities.
My sister-in-law is a elementary school counselor in Omaha, and last weekend she was talking to my wife and I, and my wife said something about the SAM at the school, and she asked, what does the SAM do? And my wife looked at me, and I gave an inaccurate answer probably. But we talked about principals playing a larger role in our schools and giving feedback to teachers and school improvement plans and the culture goals.
Yep.
And she was just kind of floored by a lot of that and said, in Omaha, we talk a lot about Counts Plus and some of the great things that you guys are doing over there. You should know that. And I said, oh, I know. But I was I was kind of half joking because I think we're doing so many really great things. I sometimes take it for granted that this district isn't unique, that a lot of these things are happening in other districts, and they're not, and it just reminded me that I'm really proud of the work that all of you are doing, and this is a really good example of that. Leadership matters, and this is just something I think we need to be very proud of. So thank you for your work on this.
Thank you, Chris.
And if nobody else, this guy walks the walk, along with Mr. Milburn. Over a decade ago, these two gentlemen came to a board meeting and talked about, as principals of schools, Mr. Milburn was at Lewis and Clark, and I can't remember,
Roosevelt.
you were at Roosevelt, and they came and talked about, they never age. I mean, so they do not age at all, but I think it's because they're so engaged. But they walk the walk. They've been, both Mr. Milburn and Mr. Schultz have been talking about what effective principals look like, and they were doing it over 10 years ago. They were going into classrooms and had their iPads, and they had a form already they presented, and they were looking, they were finding the look-fors. They had them spelled out. This is what we're looking for. This is what an effective teacher looks like, and how can we help that teacher? How can we as principals, the lead teacher in this school, help that teacher improve their efficacy as a teacher? So it just amazes me the work that you all do for our students, and for our staff as well. So
Thank you, Dave. You're making us blush, though.
Oh, well, that's okay.
They've had work done.
Oh,
It's all natural, Dean.
Any other questions or comments from the board?
great.
Yeah,
Thank you so much. Thank you for
And
your
that
work.
concludes our report.
Okay, thank you. That brings us to our resolution portion of the agenda. First, we have approval of a boiler replacement bid at Bloomer Elementary School. Is there a motion?
Move to approve the Bloomer boiler replacement project bid in the amount of $167,182 and alternate one in the amount of $34,988 to Rasmussen Mechanical of Council Bluffs, Iowa.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
And any discussion on this item? Hearing none. Mr. Wilson, will you please call the roll?
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Ms. Hudak?
Yes.
Mr. Desire?
Yes,
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
And Mr. LaFurla?
Yes. And the resolution passes. Next, we have resolution for the purchase of a new facilities tractor. Is there a motion?
I'll move a board approve the bid of Agrivision Equipment Group of Pacific Junction, Iowa, in the amount of $54,651.83 for the purchase of a John Deere 3046R compact utility tractor along with the attachments as outlined in the bid.
Thank you. Is there a second?
second.
And any discussion? Is this used primarily for snow removal? No.
Seating, front end loader, turf tires, front and back blades. I'm reading all the things. I want to drive it. It looks like it's fun.
Any other discussion? Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. Desire?
Yes,
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Ms. Hudak?
Yes.
And Mr. LaFurla?
Yes, the motion carries. Next, we have approval of the 2021-22 E-rate bid. Is there a motion?
Sure. I'll move the board approve the bid for Category 2 E-rate E-rate eligible firewalls from Howard Technology Solutions in the amount of $240,444, $36,066.60 district out-of-pocket costs, and after the E-rate discount. And then, do you want me to go ahead and do the second as well?
Yeah. it's
Yeah, I
all
think we
part of
can
the
group
same
them.
motion, yeah.
Okay, they just have it as two there. And then also move to the board approve the bid for Category 2 E-rate eligible UPS battery backups from Heartland Business Systems in the amount of $14,189.50 with the district out-of-pocket cost after E-rate of $2,128.43.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? So we have a motion and a second on both resolutions. Mr. Wilson, will you please call the roll?
Mr. McGlade?
Yes.
Dr. Ogres?
Yes.
Mr. Minshaw?
Yes.
Mr. Desire?
yes,
Ms. Hudak?
Yes.
And Mr. LaFurla?
Yes, and the motion carries. And that concludes our resolutions. Before we adjourn, I'd just like to mention to the public that prior to the board meeting, the board engaged in yet another work session where we talked about the upcoming tax levy approval decision, as well as our continuing discussion on equity, diversity, and inclusion, which the board will continue at least one more discussion as we work towards redefining our board guiding principles. I'd also like to wish the Abraham Lincoln boys basketball team good luck tomorrow in their state game at 2 o'clock. So good luck to that team, and with that, we are adjourned.
The board, if you guys just want to stick around for a minute or two, let's go into session.